Ever had someone try to steal your house while you're eating breakfast? 6 a.m., heavy pounding on my cabin door. Sheriff's deputy with court papers. Sir, we're here to seize this property for HOA violations. Behind him stands Karen Whitfield in a $500 tracksuit, clipboard clutched like a weapon, smiling like she just won the lottery. Maybe next time you'll think twice before ignoring proper authority. The smell of bacon burning inside my kitchen, morning mist rolling off the lake, and this woman trying to steal my sanctuary. Here's what she didn't know. I didn't just own that cabin. I owned the entire county, and I was about to make her HOA dues so high she'd be begging me for mercy. What happened next? Let's just say Karen learned the hard way why you should never mess with a man who reads his grandfather's old paperwork. My name's Ezra Blackwood, 52 years old, and 6 months ago I thought my biggest problem was deciding whether to use night crawlers or minnows for bass fishing. Shows you how wrong a man can be. I'd bought this lakeside cabin 20 years back, right after my Army discharge. Spent 15 years doing military logistics, making sure bullets and beans got where they needed to go, then moved into private contracting. Good money, but way too much stress for a guy who just wanted to fish in peace and listen to loons calling across the water at sunset. The divorce finalized 8 months ago. Rebecca got the suburban house, I got my freedom. Fair trade. She always said the cabin smelled like fish and old wood and broken dreams. I called that home. Willowbrook Lakes was paradise. 47 homes around a pristine lake, managed by Sunset Property Services, a laid-back outfit run by Dave who believed if it ain't broke, don't fix it. HOA dues were reasonable, rules were common sense, and neighbors actually helped each other. The kind of place where you could grill burgers on your dock while kids splashed nearby and nobody complained about noise ordinances. That ended when Karen and Brad Whitfield arrived. Karen emerged from her white Lexus SUV like a corporate consultant arriving to fire half the staff. Designer athleisure wear, perfectly styled hair, and nails so sharp they could probably cut glass. Brad sold pharmaceuticals. You could tell by his aggressive handshake and the practiced smile of someone paid to convince doctors that expensive pills cure everything. Within 30 days, Karen had volunteered for the HOA board. Within 60, she'd somehow become president after Bob Martinez, our previous president, mysteriously resigned. Rumor was Karen found procedural violations in how elections were conducted. Bob just wanted to fish and didn't have energy to fight. Karen's first move? Fired Dave and hired Professional Community Management Solutions, a company that charged 3 times as much and had a rule book thicker than War and Peace. Then came the violation notices. Mine arrived on a Tuesday, hand-delivered by Tyler, Karen's 22-year-old nephew who'd magically become our Community Standards Enforcement Officer. Kid wore a security guard uniform to deliver paperwork, like he was serving federal warrants instead of HOA complaints. Your dock extends 2 feet beyond regulation length, Tyler announced, reading from his clipboard with the seriousness of a judge pronouncing a death sentence. I walked him to my dock, built 15 years ago with proper permits, maintained annually, solid as bedrock. Show me the regulation. Silence. Because there wasn't one in the original HOA documents. That evening I knocked on Karen's door with my paperwork. She answered in yoga pants that cost more than most people's car payments, sipping wine that probably cost more than my weekly groceries. The smell of her aggressive perfume hit me like chemical warfare. These are the original covenants, I said, spreading documents on her granite countertop. No dock-length requirements. Karen barely glanced at them, her manicured nails clicking against her wine glass like tiny daggers. Mr. Blackwood, those reflect outdated thinking. We're implementing current best practices. Based on what authority? Based on protecting property values and community standards. That smile could freeze hell over. $500 fine, $100 per day until corrected. When I mentioned that shortening my dock would violate county building codes, Karen's smile widened. Sounds like a you problem. 3 weeks later, Karen had turned our peaceful community into something resembling a minimum security prison with better landscaping. Her masterstroke was hiring Tyler as our official Community Standards Enforcement Officer, a position that didn't exist in any HOA documents but somehow came with a uniform, a golf cart, and the authority to make everyone's life miserable. Tyler patrolled our streets like he was guarding Fort Knox, not a bunch of retirees trying to enjoy their golden years. The kid had created a WhatsApp group called Willowbrook Compliance Reporting, where neighbors could anonymously snitch on each other. Nothing builds community spirit like encouraging people to spy on their friends, right? Within days, violation notices were flying faster than mosquitoes in July. Roy Hendricks, a Vietnam vet who lived 2 doors down, got cited because his American flag looked inappropriately weathered. Margaret Rowan, a retired teacher who'd lived here 20 years, faced a $500 fine because her bird feeders were deemed aesthetically inconsistent with community standards. Sarah Winters, a single mom who taught elementary school, received a violation for having Christmas lights up in January. Apparently, spreading joy past December 31st was now illegal. The smell of fresh paint filled the air as panicked neighbors rushed to correct violations they didn't know existed. The sound of Tyler's golf cart squeaking around the community became our new alarm clock. Every morning at 8 a.m. sharp, he'd begin his rounds, clipboard in hand, looking for new ways to ruin someone's day. I'd had enough. Time for some good old-fashioned research. I spent 3 days diving into HOA law, property records, and our original community documents. My grandfather always used to say, "Son, the devil's in the details, but so is your salvation." Turns out the old man knew what he was talking about. What I found made my blood boil and gave me hope at the same time. Karen had never been properly elected president. The meeting where she supposedly won lacked the required quorum according to our original bylaws. I'd learned from my Army logistics days that most organizations fail because they don't follow their own procedures. Tyler had zero legal authority to issue citations since his position was never approved by homeowner vote. Most importantly, those updated bylaws she kept referencing, they'd never been voted on by homeowners as required by state law. I called an emergency HOA meeting for the following Thursday. Time to expose this power grab for what it was. Karen arrived with reinforcements. Marcus Sterling, a lawyer in an expensive suit who looked like he charged by the minute just to breathe. Sterling had brought a briefcase full of documents and the kind of smug expression that suggested he'd eaten smaller fish for breakfast. "Mr. Blackwood," Sterling announced before I could even speak, "my client has asked me to address some procedural concerns that have been raised." He produced a stack of papers thicker than a phone book. "These are the updated community bylaws, properly filed with the county and fully compliant with state HOA regulations." The documents were dated 3 months before Karen had even moved to our community. Somehow she'd retroactively legitimized her entire power grab with paperwork that had been filed before she'd even seen our lake. The taste of betrayal was bitter as stale coffee. "How exactly," I asked, trying to keep my voice level, "did Karen file updated bylaws for a community she didn't live in?" Sterling's smile could have cut glass. Mrs. Whitfield was acting as a consultant for community improvement initiatives. All procedures were followed to the letter. The new bylaws included everything Karen needed. Expanded violation categories, a community standards officer position with enforcement authority, expedited eviction procedures, and, my personal favorite, mandatory assessments for community enhancement projects that didn't require homeowner approval. Margaret Rowan raised her hand timidly. "Don't we get to vote on bylaw changes?" "You just did," Sterling replied, "by not objecting within the 30-day notification period." "What notification?" Roy Hendricks demanded. Sterling pointed to a small classified ad in the legal notices section of the county newspaper, buried between foreclosure announcements and court summons. I remembered reading somewhere that most HOAs try this trick because homeowners never check legal notices. Apparently that counted as proper notice under some obscure legal technicality. I realized I wasn't just fighting Karen anymore. I was fighting a system designed to steamroll anyone who couldn't afford Sterling's hourly rate. But I'd learned something in the Army. When you're outgunned, you don't retreat. You get creative. 2 weeks after Sterling's legal ambush, Karen decided subtlety was overrated. Time for financial warfare. The certified letters hit 5 mailboxes simultaneously on Monday morning like a coordinated drone strike. Property liens filed against our homes for unpaid fines and assessments. My damage report, $3,200 in violations, late fees, and something called administrative processing charges. Apparently, Karen charged for the privilege of being harassed. But Karen's real masterpiece was her kangaroo court. She called it the Neighborhood Improvement Committee, which sounds almost wholesome until you realize it was basically 5 people with clipboards deciding who gets to keep their house. My tribunal was Thursday at 7 p.m. I walked into that community center feeling like I was entering a medieval inquisition, except the torturers wore designer yoga pants and manicures sharp enough to perform surgery. Karen had prepared a PowerPoint presentation, I kid you not. Enlarged photos of my violations, projected like evidence in a capital murder case. My dock, mailbox, firewood stack. Each photo annotated with arrows and measurements as if she'd hired CSY Lakefront Edition. Mr. Blackwood, your continuous disregard for community standards threatens property values for all residents, she announced, reading from prepared notes like a prosecutor seeking the death penalty for jaywalking. The smell of her aggressive perfume mixed with the stale coffee scent in the community center created an aroma I can only describe as corporate fascism with vanilla undertones. I kept it simple. Show me where in the original documents any of these are violations. Karen's smile could have flash-frozen a bonfire. We've moved beyond outdated documentation to evidence-based standards. That's when I understood. This wasn't about rules. This was about power, and Karen was drunk on it. The next morning, I hired Janet Morrison, a local attorney who specialized in eating HOA boards for breakfast and charging reasonable rates to do it. Janet was everything Sterling wasn't. Practical, affordable, and genuinely enraged by petty tyrants pretending to be community leaders. Ezra, she said after reviewing my file, this is textbook HOA abuse. Janet had seen this playbook before. Most amateur boards mess up lien procedures because they're too arrogant to follow actual laws. While Janet built our legal case, I started recording everything. My contracting days had taught me that people love to deny what they said until you play their own words back to them. But Janet's real bombshell came when she investigated Sterling's firm. Turns out our expensive lawyer represented multiple property developers throughout the county. More interesting, recent insurance records showed Karen meeting with flood risk assessors. Basically, people paid to find excuses for declaring waterfront properties too risky for current owners. I wasn't facing harassment. I was facing a land grab disguised as community improvement. The pattern was textbook. Compliance campaigns followed by developer interest in distressed properties. 3 other lakefront communities had experienced identical coincidences. Meanwhile, Karen's harassment machine shifted into overdrive. Tyler started dinnertime wellness checks that involved photographing everything and interrogating neighbors about our financial situations. Karen distributed flyers warning that troublemakers were destroying property values. Her husband Brad began casual conversations about whether people could really afford lakefront living. Anonymous complaints flooded county offices. Suddenly, every targeted homeowner faced septic inspections, electrical code violations, and structural concerns reported by concerned neighbors. Then Karen dropped her financial nuclear bomb, emergency assessment of $1,500 per household for urgent lake maintenance. 30 days to pay or face foreclosure. Pure genius, really. Force out anyone who couldn't produce large lump sums immediately. 3 families had already surrendered and listed their homes rather than fight. But Karen had made one critical error in her war planning. She'd assumed I was just another cash-strapped retiree who'd crumble under economic pressure. She had absolutely no idea what kind of financial firepower she'd just declared war against. Karen's next move proved she'd graduated from petty tyrant to full-blown neighborhood warlord with a government uniform fetish. She'd somehow seduced Dennis Kruger, our county's code enforcement officer, a man who looked like he'd been personally betrayed by every building he'd ever inspected. Suddenly, county officials were materializing at targeted homes like bad rashes, citing violations for septic systems, electrical work, and structural issues that had passed inspection just months earlier. My dock, which had sailed through county safety reviews for 15 years, mysteriously failed its latest inspection. Kruger stood there shaking his head like he'd discovered a ticking time bomb instead of some weathered cedar planking. This structure presents potential safety risks to watercraft navigation, he announced, apparently having swallowed a legal dictionary for breakfast. It's the same dock that passed 6 months ago, I pointed out. Kruger shrugged with the enthusiasm of a man paid to care exactly 0%. Standards evolve. New safety protocols require more rigorous evaluation. The smell of bureaucratic corruption mixed with the fish guts Roy Hendricks was cleaning on his dock created an aroma I can only describe as government efficiency meets lakefront living. Karen stood behind Kruger wearing the satisfied smile of someone who'd just figured out how to weaponize municipal incompetence. But Karen wasn't satisfied with local tyranny. She'd started attending county planning meetings like some sort of community compliance evangelist, pushing for residential enforcement initiatives that would give HOAs expanded authority to ruin lives. Anonymous IRS tips were flooding in about residents supposedly running unreported businesses. Sarah Winters discovered sugar in her gas tank the morning after publicly supporting me because nothing says community standards like automotive sabotage. Time to stop playing defense and start gathering some real intelligence. My accountant buddy Mike Rowan, Margaret's son who handled property transfers, stumbled across something beautiful in county records. Karen and Brad had been quietly acquiring tax-delinquent properties through a shell company called Lakefront Holdings, LLC. The properties they bought always seemed to have recent code violations that mysteriously forced owners to sell below market value. The scam was elegant. Create violations, pressure sales, buy cheap, flip expensive. Karen wasn't just drunk on power. She was running a real estate con game using government authority as her personal enforcement squad. Janet Morrison filed ethics complaints against Kruger while I tracked his recent lifestyle upgrades through public records. Amazing how a county employee earning $45,000 annually could suddenly afford a boat worth more than his annual salary and Caribbean vacations that cost more than most people's cars. But Karen's pièce de resistance was still coming. She called an emergency meeting to announce escalated enforcement protocols and introduced her new management company, which, surprise, Dash connected directly to Sterling's law firm. The new rules were simple. Outstanding violations meant losing voting rights in HOA matters. When Margaret Rowan, a woman who'd taught kindergarten for 30 years and treated everyone's children like her own grandkids, stood up to ask questions, Karen nodded to Tyler. He escorted our retired teacher out like she was a dangerous criminal disrupting a board meeting instead of a concerned neighbor asking reasonable questions. The sound of Margaret's sensible shoes scuffing across that linoleum floor as Tyler dragged her out, that's when this whole thing stopped being about property disputes and became personal. Our community split like a log under an axe. Karen's supporters, mostly newer residents who'd bought her property values snake oil, versus those of us who remembered when neighbors actually helped each other. Anonymous flyers started appearing calling us community destroyers and property value terrorists. Roy Hendricks's American flag, the same flag that had flown over our lake through 20 years of storms and seasons, got cited for being inappropriately weathered. A Vietnam veteran's patriotism wasn't good enough for Princess Karen's aesthetic standards. That's when she scheduled her community standards hearing with county officials present. Agenda item: removal of non-compliant homeowners for community welfare. Karen's endgame was crystal clear: use county muscle to seize our homes, force us out, hand everything to her developer friends. But our HOA dictator had made one tiny miscalculation. She thought she was bullying some broken-down veterans and retired teachers who'd surrender when faced with official pressure. She had absolutely no clue she'd just declared war on the guy who actually owned the county. You know that moment when you realize your whole life has been a setup for one perfect plot twist? Mine came courtesy of a manila envelope I'd been using as a bookmark for 20 years. I was cleaning out Grandpa's old filing cabinet. The man hoarded paperwork like other people collect stamps, when I found documents labeled Willowbrook County Holdings. I'd always figured Grandpa's obsession with filing every receipt was just old-fashioned paranoia. Turns out the old man wasn't crazy. He was playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers. The first document made me sit down so hard I nearly broke the chair. A deed from 1967 showing Grandpa buying 1,200 acres of worthless swampland for $800. The kind of land real estate agents would apologize for showing you. The second document was a mineral rights agreement. The third was water rights. By the fourth, my coffee had gone cold and my hands were shaking like I'd stuck my finger in an electrical socket. My grandfather hadn't just bought swampland. He'd systematically acquired the guts of what became Willowbrook County: mineral rights, water access, development control for most of the prime real estate. That worthless swamp had transformed into 3 lake communities, 2 golf courses, and half the county's commercial district. The smell of old paper and my grandfather's cologne still lingering in that filing cabinet suddenly seemed like the scent of victory. I didn't just own my cabin. Through inheritance and Grandpa's strategic brilliance, I owned 47% of Willowbrook County's mineral rights, water rights to 3 major lakes including ours, majority control of the development trust, and, this was the cherry on top, silent partnership in the county's largest property management company. Those quarterly checks I'd been cashing without thinking? Not pension payments. Lease fees from the county for using my mineral and water rights. The amount should have been $847,000 annually. I'd been getting $12,000 because someone had been helping themselves to my money for decades. I called Janet Morrison. She made a sound like someone had punched her in the stomach. Ezra, you don't just have property rights in this county. You practically own this county. Every code enforcement action against me violated my agreements with county government. Karen's developer buddies needed my signature for any major projects. Most beautifully, I could revoke water access for properties violating land trust agreements, and I had authority to fire any property management company servicing HOAs. Karen had been trying to use county muscle to steal my property, never realizing the county had been operating on my land with my permission for 50 years. The irony was so perfect it almost hurt. But the real gut punch was Grandpa's handwritten note tucked in the back. Ezra, sometimes the best revenge is patience. When you need this power, remember, authority without principle is just bullying. Do right by your neighbors. Grandpa. The crafty old bastard had seen this coming decades ago. He'd built generational wealth not for greed, but as a shield against exactly the kind of corporate parasites Karen represented. I spent the weekend verifying everything with Janet and the county clerk. All legitimate, properly recorded, legally bulletproof. The county owed me nearly $700,000 in back payments. I had the power to obliterate Karen's entire scheme with a phone call, but Grandpa's words kept echoing. Do right by your neighbors. Time to show Karen what real authority looked like, and why it should never be confused with tyranny. You know what they say about the best laid plans? Mine started in my cabin basement at 2 a.m. with too much coffee and a wall that looked like something out of a conspiracy thriller. I'd assembled my war council. Janet Morrison with her legal expertise and caffeine addiction that rivaled mine, Margaret Rowan armed with 20 years of meticulous HOA documentation, Roy Hendricks providing military tactical thinking, and Sarah Winters handling communications with the subtle skill of someone who'd managed classroom politics for a decade. The basement smelled like old wood and determination as we spread maps, property records, and timeline charts across every available surface. Janet had brought Dr. Amanda Foster, a property law expert from the State University who took one look at my inheritance documents and whistled like she'd just seen a unicorn. This is the most comprehensive property rights portfolio I've encountered in 30 years of academic research, Dr. Foster announced, adjusting her glasses. Your grandfather essentially created a legal fortress around this entire county. We codenamed our operation Grandfather's Revenge. Seemed appropriate given the circumstances. Janet's legal strategy was elegantly vicious. She'd file a quiet title action to establish my full property rights while simultaneously preparing a discrimination lawsuit against the HOA for selective enforcement. Dr. Foster had identified 47 violations of state HOA governance laws in Karen's reign of terror, each one carrying potential personal liability for board members who acted outside their authority. The financial warfare plan was my personal favorite. I could legally raise county property management fees by 400% effective immediately, or alternatively, the county could hire the family-owned management company I'd recommend, one that actually followed proper procedures instead of manufacturing violations for profit. Margaret Rowan had organized what she called a document preservation project, systematically copying every original HOA document and creating an archive that exposed how Karen had systematically violated every governance requirement. The woman had taught kindergarten for 3 decades, and her organizational skills made military logistics look sloppy. Sarah Winters launched a covert neighborhood newsletter that she distributed during her evening jogs, educating residents about HOA law and their rights. The newsletter included helpful tips like the fact that most HOA emergency assessments require 60-day notice periods, and that enforcement officers need proper homeowner approval to have any real authority. Roy Hendricks coordinated with local veteran organizations and previous HOA board members that Karen had pushed out. His network of contacts throughout the county proved invaluable for gathering intelligence about Karen's developer connections and Kruger's suspicious lifestyle improvements. The timing strategy was crucial. We'd let Karen's final community standards hearing proceed as scheduled, allowing her to commit maximum violations of law and ethics while we documented everything. The annual HOA meeting was 6 weeks away. Perfect timing for a coordinated counterattack that would coincide with county elections where 3 commissioners faced re-election. Dr. Foster's crash course in HOA law revealed some beautiful legal weapons. HOA board members have something called fiduciary duty. They're legally obligated to act in homeowners' best interests, not their own financial gain. When board members use their position to facilitate personal business deals or target specific residents for harassment, they become personally liable for damages. I'd learned during my contracting days that the best way to defeat corruption is to make it too expensive to continue. Janet explained how Karen's actions qualified as tortious interference, illegally disrupting residents' peaceful enjoyment of their property and potentially their business relationships. The psychological warfare component involved letting Karen feel she was winning while we built an ironclad case. Roy spread rumors about outside investors showing interest in multiple properties, creating the impression that resistance was crumbling. Meanwhile, every day Karen remained in power made our legal case stronger and her eventual downfall more spectacular. We prepared contingency plans for every scenario. If Karen discovered my true position early, Janet would file immediate federal civil rights violations. If county officials tried intervening on Karen's behalf, I'd threaten to revoke all development agreements. If developers attempted direct intimidation, we'd trigger a state attorney general investigation into public corruption. Janet had already contacted a local investigative reporter who specialized in municipal corruption stories. The media strategy was locked and loaded. I liquidated some investments and established a $200,000 legal defense fund. Not because we'd need it all, but because nothing sends a message like being prepared for total war. I'd also contacted my grandfather's old attorney, now 80, and retired but still sharp as a tack, who provided historical context about the original land agreements. The resources were assembled, alternative property management company lined up, community improvement proposals drafted, and preparation for Karen's inevitable meltdown when she realized she'd been outplayed by someone who actually understood how power works. As I looked at our planning wall covered with documents, timelines, and strategic objectives, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my Army days, the quiet confidence that comes from superior preparation facing an overconfident enemy. Karen had no idea what was about to hit her. Karen's response to organized resistance was like watching someone pour gasoline on a fire and act surprised when it exploded. She'd discovered our little coalition through her network of neighborhood spies and decided to end what she called this insurgency once and for all. Her first move was hiring a private investigator, or at least someone she thought was a private investigator. Turns out Professional Investigations LLC was actually Karen's cousin Rick with a criminal justice degree from a community college and delusions of being a real detective. Rick started following me around town like a discount version of a spy thriller, taking photos of me buying groceries and getting gas as if documenting some international conspiracy. The man was about as subtle as a neon sign, driving a beat-up sedan and wearing sunglasses indoors like he was undercover at a grocery store. Meanwhile, Karen had Sterling's firm file restraining orders against 5 of us for allegedly harassing her through our coordinated campaign of intimidation. According to the legal paperwork, asking questions at HOA meetings and requesting financial records constituted stalking. The woman had apparently confused accountability with persecution. But Karen's nuclear option was character assassination. She created fake social media accounts posting about the dangerous, unstable veteran threatening community safety and the radical elements causing property values to plummet. Anonymous flyers appeared in mailboxes warning about troublemakers who didn't respect community standards and family values. Tyler's enforcement squad had expanded. He'd recruited 2 friends for security patrols, basically an intimidation team that included photographing children at bus stops and questioning visitors about their business in our community. The smell of testosterone and stupidity followed these guys around like cheap cologne. Sarah Winters received a call from her school principal about concerned parent complaints regarding her involvement in neighborhood disputes. Anonymous reports to child services questioned her parenting because she'd been seen at confrontational meetings. Margaret Rowan found her tires slashed the morning after she'd spoken publicly about Karen's financial irregularities. The false police reports multiplied like weeds. Suspicious activity calls every time one of us had visitors or worked in our yards past sunset. Roy Hendricks got questioned by deputies because someone reported him aggressively displaying weapons. He'd been cleaning his fishing gear on his dock. But I wasn't sitting idle while Karen escalated her campaign of harassment. My private investigator friend had uncovered some interesting information about Karen's previous life in Florida. Turns out she'd been forced to resign from her last HOA position after financial discrepancies involving missing community funds and mysteriously awarded contracts to companies owned by her relatives. Tyler's background check revealed arrests for theft and harassment in his previous state. Plus, he was technically living in our community illegally since his criminal record violated the original HOA residency requirements. Brad's pharmaceutical company was under federal investigation for Medicare fraud involving inflated billing for medications never delivered to patients. Janet Morrison's investigation into Sterling's law firm revealed a pattern of ethics violations in other jurisdictions, including misuse of client funds and conflicts of interest involving real estate deals. The man had been disciplined twice by state bar associations but kept moving to new states and starting fresh. Karen's financial web was unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. Dr. Foster's audit had uncovered $73,000 in missing HOA funds, traced through bank records to consulting fees paid to companies Karen secretly owned. The woman had been embezzling community money to fund her lifestyle while lecturing us about fiscal responsibility. The breakthrough came when Sarah's restaurant contact recorded Karen's meeting with County Planning Commissioner James Walsh. The conversation included explicit discussion of rezoning opportunities once problem properties were acquired, developer partnerships planning luxury resort development on our lakefront, and Karen's promised executive position in the new development company once the acquisition phase was complete. But the incident that turned even Karen's supporters against her was Tyler's confrontation with Margaret Rowan. The 70-year-old retired teacher was walking her ancient beagle when Tyler and his crew cornered her, demanding to know why she was spreading lies about community leadership. When Margaret tried to walk away, Tyler grabbed her arm and threatened to have her removed from the community permanently. A neighbor's security camera captured the entire incident. Watching a 22-year-old punk physically intimidate a grandmother who'd taught half the county's children was the final straw for many residents who'd previously supported Karen's property values rhetoric. Sheriff Daniels arrested Tyler for assault. Karen claimed it was a misunderstanding and that Margaret had been aggressive and confrontational. The body camera footage told a different story. Suddenly, 38 out of 47 homeowners actively opposed Karen's regime. Several who'd previously supported her publicly switched sides after witnessing Tyler's true colors. Karen realized her power base was crumbling and called for an emergency community meeting with county officials, developers, and media present to witness her final resolution of the non-compliant homeowner problem. She had no idea she was walking into my trap. When cornered animals get desperate, they either surrender or go completely feral. Karen chose feral. Her social media smear campaign exploded across every platform like a digital carpet bombing. The fake accounts she'd created now posted hourly about the organized criminal element threatening Willowbrook Lakes, complete with out-of-context photos of me talking to neighbors and doctored images suggesting late-night conspiracy meetings. According to Karen's online narrative, I was simultaneously a dangerous PTSD-addled veteran, a financial predator targeting elderly residents, and the ringleader of a property value destruction conspiracy. Sterling's law firm issued press releases painting Karen as a dedicated community volunteer under siege by frivolous lawsuits and harassment campaigns designed to obstruct legitimate community governance. And they'd contacted Channel 7 News with Karen's sob story about trying to maintain family-friendly standards while facing coordinated attacks by radical elements. Karen's morning show appearance was a masterpiece of victimhood performance art. Sitting in the studio wearing her most conservative outfit and speaking in hushed, concerned tones, she painted herself as a mother just trying to protect children and property values from dangerous individuals who don't respect community safety. I never imagined that volunteering to serve my neighbors would result in threats and intimidation, she told the sympathetic host, dabbing her eyes with tissues. But someone has to stand up for families and community standards. The harassment escalated beyond anything we'd experienced. Tyler's security team now included daily patrols that involved following residents to work, photographing license plates of anyone visiting targeted homes, and blocking driveways during inspections. They'd taken to wearing matching black t-shirts like some kind of suburban militia. Anonymous reports flooded government agencies. The health department received tips about unsanitary conditions at our properties. The fire marshal got calls about safety violations requiring immediate inspection. Child Protective Services investigated Sarah Winters based on reports that she was emotionally unstable and creating an unsafe environment for her daughter. Karen had weaponized every government agency she could think of, turning bureaucracy into a harassment tool. But her legal overreach was breathtaking. Sterling filed emergency injunctions claiming we were conspiring to damage property values through a coordinated campaign of defamation and community disruption. The court documents requested appointment of a special master to manage HOA affairs, with Sterling himself nominated for the position, naturally. The paperwork claimed our organized resistance constituted racketeering under state anti-corruption statutes. Karen was literally arguing that asking for financial transparency and following proper procedures amounted to organized crime. Meanwhile, my counter-investigation was bearing fruit that would make Karen choke. Janet's forensic accountant had traced the missing HOA funds through a maze of shell companies back to Karen's personal accounts. The woman had been living off embezzled community money while lecturing us about fiscal responsibility. Brad's pharmaceutical company had just been raided by federal agents investigating Medicare fraud. The scheme involved billing for expensive medications never delivered to nursing homes, pocketing the insurance payments, and bribing administrators to falsify delivery records. Brad was facing 20 years in federal prison. Tyler's security friends turned out to have criminal records that read like a greatest hits of petty crime. Assault, drug possession, theft, and harassment charges spanning 3 states. These were the people Karen had armed with clipboards and sent to protect community standards. But the smoking gun came from Sarah's restaurant intelligence network. She'd recorded Karen's final planning meeting with developers where they discussed the timeline for clearing remaining holdouts and finalizing the resort development project. Karen explicitly stated she could guarantee 5 more properties would be available for acquisition within 60 days, and the developers offered her a $50,000 bonus for successful project completion. The woman wasn't just running an HOA, she was running a criminal enterprise. Karen's desperation peaked when she announced her final community standards hearing for the following Tuesday. County commissioners, developers, Sterling's entire firm, and local media were invited to witness what she called professional community management, taking control of a deteriorating situation. Her agenda was crystal clear: immediate foreclosure proceedings against 6 properties, appointment of Sterling's firm as permanent community management, and implementation of enhanced security protocols that would essentially turn our neighborhood into a police state. Karen planned to celebrate her victory that same evening with a party for her developer partners, county officials, and legal team. She'd already sent invitations announcing the successful community transformation and her new position as Director of Lakefront Development Initiatives. The smell of Karen's expensive perfume couldn't mask the stench of corruption surrounding her entire operation. But she was so intoxicated by her own power that she couldn't see the trap I'd spent months preparing. Tuesday would be the day Karen learned the difference between borrowed authority and actual ownership. She was about to discover exactly who really controlled Willowbrook County. Tuesday evening, 7 p.m. The community center was packed like a courthouse during a celebrity trial. All 47 homeowners were there, plus County Commissioners Walsh, Rodriguez, and Thompson, Sheriff Daniels, Channel 7's news crew, Sterling and his legal team, and Karen's developer partners sitting in the front row like a corporate board of directors. The smell of nervous sweat and expensive cologne created an atmosphere you could cut with a knife. Karen arrived fashionably late in a brand new BMW SUV, apparently embezzled HOA funds by nice rides. She wore a designer business suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage payments, and carried herself like a CEO about to announce record profits. Sterling flanked her right side, the developers flanked her left, and Tyler brought up the rear in his ridiculous security uniform. I sat in the back with Margaret Rowan, Janet Morrison, and Roy Hendricks, carrying nothing but a simple manila folder. Karen glanced at us with the satisfied smile of someone about to deliver a death blow. "Ladies and gentlemen," Karen began, her voice carrying that corporate authority tone she'd perfected, "tonight we restore proper professional management and community standards to Willowbrook Lakes. She clicked to her first PowerPoint slide, because of course she had a presentation. Effective immediately, we're implementing foreclosure proceedings against 6 non-compliant properties whose owners have consistently refused to meet basic community obligations. The room buzzed with murmurs as she listed the properties: mine, Margaret's, Roy's, Sarah's, and 2 others. Karen announced that Willowbrook Lakes Development Partners would assume community management and begin the transformation into a luxury lakefront resort destination. Questions? Karen asked with the confidence of someone who owned the room. I stood up slowly. I have a few questions about HOA finances. Mr. Blackwood, your time for questions has expired along with your residency rights, Karen replied dismissively. I opened my folder and pulled out Dr. Foster's audit. According to forensic accounting, $73,000 in community funds have gone missing over the past 8 months. Karen's smile never wavered. Mr. Blackwood, these frivolous accusations from disgruntled residents won't derail legitimate community governance. Sterling jumped up. Any defamatory statements will result in immediate legal action. That's when Sarah Winters stood up and played the restaurant recording on her phone. Karen's voice filled the room crystal clear. I can guarantee 5 more properties will be available for acquisition within 60 days. These holdouts don't understand they're fighting a losing battle. The developer's voice followed. Excellent. Once we clear the remaining residents, we can break ground on the resort by next spring. Your $50,000 completion bonus will be wired upon final acquisition. Karen's face went white as fresh snow. That recording was illegally obtained and taken completely out of context. Actually, Janet Morrison said, standing with a stack of official documents, it's perfectly legal and completely damning. We also have federal civil rights investigators reviewing discriminatory enforcement patterns targeting veterans, elderly residents, and single mothers. Commissioner Walsh was frantically whispering to his colleagues, suddenly realizing they'd been dragged into a criminal conspiracy. Sterling was making panicked phone calls, probably to his malpractice insurance carrier. But I wasn't done. Time for the nuclear option. Before we discuss foreclosures, I said, my voice carrying across the silent room, let's clarify exactly who owns what around here. I pulled out my inheritance documents. These papers show that I own 47% of the mineral rights in Willowbrook County, water rights to all 3 major lakes, and majority control of the land trust that governs development in this area. Karen's mouth dropped open like a fish gasping for air. That's impossible. Those documents are fake. They're recorded with the county clerk and have been for 50 years, I continued. Every property foreclosure requires my approval as trust beneficiary. Every development project needs my signature, and every county official in this room has been paying me lease fees for decades to operate on my land. Sterling was frantically flipping through legal briefs, his expensive suit suddenly looking like it was strangling him. The developers looked like they'd just watched their retirement funds evaporate. In fact, I announced, I'm raising property management fees for the county by 400%, effective immediately. Alternative, hire the family-owned management company I recommend that actually follows legal procedures. Karen finally lost it. This is a conspiracy. Those documents are fabricated. This whole thing is illegal. That's when Sheriff Daniels' phone rang. He answered, listened, then looked directly at Karen. Ma'am, federal agents are outside with warrants for you and Tyler on fraud and conspiracy charges. The FBI walked in as Karen screamed about conspiracies and illegal surveillance. Tyler was handcuffed while trying to hide behind Sterling, who formally withdrew representation due to irreconcilable conflicts of interest. The Channel 7 cameras captured Karen being questioned by federal agents while her developer partners fled through the back exit to avoid media questions. Margaret Rowan called for an immediate vote to recall Karen from the HOA board. The count was 44 in favor, 3 opposed. Karen was officially fired while in federal custody. As I watched Karen's empire crumble in real time, I couldn't help but think Grandpa would have appreciated the irony. Sometimes the best revenge really is just being patient. 3 months later, our community center smelled like Margaret Rowan's famous lemonade and fresh hope instead of fear and expensive perfume. Definitely an upgrade. Karen and Tyler both pled guilty to federal fraud charges. Karen earned 3 years in federal prison plus $340,000 in restitution to affected homeowners. Tyler got 18 months and a lifetime ban from any HOA position anywhere. Brad fled to Costa Rica ahead of his Medicare fraud indictment, abandoning Karen to face justice alone like the coward he'd always been. Sterling's law firm lost their state license after the Bar Association uncovered ethics violations spanning multiple jurisdictions. The man who'd terrorized us with legal threats was last seen selling car insurance from a strip mall in Arizona. But watching our community heal was the real victory. Margaret Rowan was unanimously elected HOA president and immediately rewrote our bylaws with bulletproof oversight. New rules require 60% homeowner approval for major changes, monthly financial transparency, and zero tolerance for harassment. We'd learned our lesson about unchecked power. I declined the president role but became our community ombudsman, ensuring disputes get resolved through fairness instead of intimidation. My property rights now guarantee that no foreclosures proceed without genuine due process and community input. The financial justice tasted sweeter than Margaret's lemonade. We recovered all stolen funds plus penalties, creating a community fund that's already paid for playground equipment, dock repairs, and scholarships. 3 families Karen had driven out were offered first chance to buy back their homes below market price. 2 returned, tears in their eyes, grateful to be home. Our victory became the model for state HOA reform legislation. Dr. Foster published academic papers on property rights as community protection. Janet Morrison now specializes in HOA abuse cases, using our win as her signature achievement. National property rights organizations feature our story as proof that individual citizens can defeat institutional corruption. The personal transformation meant more than legal victory. I'd found purpose beyond hiding at my cabin. Instead of seeking isolation, I was protecting people who'd been genuine neighbors for decades. Margaret became my trusted advisor, keeping me grounded when power might corrupt. My grandfather's legacy lives through the Willowbrook Community Scholarship Fund, $20,000 annually for students pursuing education, trades, or military service. Our lake conservation program protects water quality for future generations. Senior services help elderly residents with maintenance they can't handle alone. Monthly Good Neighbor gatherings replace Karen's hostile meetings. We celebrate community projects and solve problems collaboratively. Conflict resolution through mediation, not punishment. We appreciate diverse property styles instead of enforcing conformity through fear. Sarah Winters became school principal after the harassment exposed district corruption. Roy Hendricks leads a veteran support group meeting at our center. Margaret teaches financial literacy workshops protecting residents from future HOA predators. The lessons transcend property law. Patience and documentation beat angry confrontation every time. Community strength flows from inclusion, not enforcement. Knowledge protects against bullies. Sometimes the quiet person in back wields more real power than the loudest voice up front. Karen's cautionary tale echoes throughout the county about what happens when petty tyrants forget that true authority serves others, not self-interest. The beautiful irony still makes me smile. Karen tried stealing my sanctuary and accidentally gave me something infinitely better, a community worth protecting, and proof that my grandfather's patient wisdom could shield good people from bad actors. Last week, homeowners from 3 states contacted me about similar HOA corruption. Willowbrook was just the opening chapter of a much larger story about ordinary people learning to fight institutional bullying. But that's another adventure. Tonight, I'm grilling burgers on my non-compliant dock that started this whole beautiful mess, watching kids splash while neighbors wave from their own docks. The evening air carries the sound of laughter instead of golf cart squeaks, and the taste of victory is infinitely sweeter than any revenge. Have you survived an HOA nightmare? Share your story in the comments. Your experience could help others facing similar battles. And if this tale of community justice fired you up, smash that subscribe button for HOA Tales, because next week we're exposing the city council member who tried seizing a veteran's food truck until discovering the vet owned the entire downtown district.